Physics is usually a predictable thing. Gravity pulls down, water flows downstream, wind blows across the plains. But in the late afternoon of April 14th, 1886, the laws of physics in central Minnesota broke. They didn't just bend, they shattered. We are talking about a force of nature so violent, so incomprehensibly powerful, that it generated a vacuum capable of things that, quite frankly, sound impossible. It didn't just tear buildings apart. It didn't just twist iron rails into knots like wet shoelaces. Witnesses, credible witnesses, standing on the banks of the Mississippi River, watched in horror as the water simply vanished. For a few terrifying seconds, the riverbed was sucked dry, exposed to the air, the mud, the rocks, the bottom of the mighty Mississippi, laid bare by a straw made of wind. And when that water came crashing back down, it washed away a city that was supposed to be the capital of the North. This is not a story about bad weather. This is the story of the day the map of the Midwest was rewritten. By 15 minutes of hell, to understand the horror of what happened that afternoon, you first have to understand what was lost. Because if you look at a map of Minnesota today, you see Minneapolis and St. Paul as the twin titans of industry. But in 1886, that future wasn't written yet. There were two other cities, 80 miles to the north, locked in a bitter, desperate war for dominance, St. Cloud and Sauk Rapids. It was a knife fight, dressed up in suits and ties. You had St. Cloud on the west bank, Sauk Rapids on the east, and they hated each other. It wasn't just business, it was personal. Sauk Rapids had the water power, they had the granite, they had the momentum. Everyone knew. Simply, everyone knew. Sauk Rapids was going to be the metropolis of the Northwest. Sauk Rapids was the golden child. It was wealthy. It was industrial. It sat on the sweet spot of the river, where the rapids provided endless energy for the flour mills. It was a boomtown in every sense of the word. People moved there to get rich. They built massive brick buildings, sturdy, permanent, declarations of their power. They thought they were building a legacy that would last 1,000 years. St. Cloud, across the water, was the scrappy underdog. They were fighting for every scrap of trade, every rail line, every immigrant family looking for a home. The tension between these two towns was thick enough to cut with a knife. But on the morning of April 14th, the tension in the boardrooms was replaced by something else, something in the air. It's the morning of the disaster. April 14th. Typically, in Minnesota, this time of year is unpredictable. It can snow, it can rain, it can be a crisp 40 degrees. But when the sun came up that Wednesday, the farmers knew immediately something was wrong. It was the heat. That's what I remember most. It wasn't just warm. It was oppressive, sticky. You walked outside at 7 in the morning and your dress stuck to your back. The air felt heavy, like a wet wool blanket draped over your face. It was 80 degrees in mid-April in Minnesota. The humidity was off the charts. Today, we have Doppler radar. We have satellites. We have sirens that can warn us 15 minutes before a disaster strikes. We know that high heat and humidity, mixed with a cold front coming from the Rockies, is a recipe for atmospheric violence. But in 1886, they didn't have radar, they had folklore, and they had instinct. Farmers looked at the sky and called it earthquake weather. It's a term you don't hear much anymore, but back then, it described a stillness, a silence so profound it made your ears ring. The cattle were restless. Dogs were hiding under porches hours before a single drop of rain fell. The atmosphere was charging up, like a battery. And this is where the tragedy begins, because despite the heat, despite the strange yellow tint to the morning sky, life went on. In Sauk Rapids, the flour mills were running at full capacity, the vibration of the machinery humming through the floorboards. In St. Cloud, the freight house was packed with workers moving cargo, getting the trains ready for the evening departure. And in the small farming community of Rice, just a few miles north, a family was preparing for a celebration, a wedding. Charles Lindbergh, not the aviator, But a man just as hopeful for his future was preparing to marry the love of his life. Guests were arriving. The farmhouse was filled with the smell of food, the sound of laughter, the rustle of silk and lace. They were in the path of a monster, and they didn't even know it existed. By 1 p.m., the heat is becoming unbearable. People are fainting in the streets. The air is so saturated with moisture that walls are sweating. And then, the wind shifts. To the southwest, near the Dakota border, a cold, dry air mass is racing across the plains at 50 miles per hour. It's colliding with that warm, sticky air hanging over St. Cloud. When these two air masses meet, they don't mix, they clash. The warm air is forced upward, violently. It shoots into the upper atmosphere, cooling rapidly, condensing into massive, towering thunderheads, cumulonimbus clouds, anvils of doom. By 2 p.m., the sky over St. Cloud begins to bruise. It wasn't gray. Clouds are supposed to be gray. These were purple, deep, dark, purple, and green, a sickly olive green. It looked like the sky was infected. That green color, that's sunlight refracting through massive amounts of ice. Hail. Hailstones the size of baseballs, suspended thousands of feet in the air by updrafts so powerful they defy gravity. At 3 p.m., the birds stop singing. This is a detail that appears in almost every diary entry from that day. The silence. Usually, a spring afternoon is a symphony of nature, but this silence was heavy. It was a pressure change. The barometer was plummeting. The air pressure was dropping so fast that people reported their ears popping, their heads aching. The city of St. Cloud and the city of Sauk Rapids were sitting inside a pressure cooker, and the lid was about to blow off. Let's talk about the geography for a second. Because the path this storm is about to take, it feels targeted. It feels malicious. You have St. Cloud on the west, then the Mississippi River, wide and deep, then Sauk Rapids on the east. Most tornadoes, historically, lose power when they cross rough terrain or large bodies of water. There is a myth, a persistent myth, that rivers protect cities from tornadoes, that the water cools the air, or the channel disrupts the airflow. The people of Sauk Rapids believed this. They looked across the river at the darkening sky over St. Cloud, and they thought, it will stay over there. They were wrong, dead wrong. The science tells us that a river this size does nothing to stop an F4 or F5 tornado. In fact, the lack of friction over the water might actually allow the wind speeds to accelerate. The river wasn't a shield, it was a highway. 3:30 p.m. The sky is now a wall of black. It's not just clouds anymore. It's a solid curtain of water and hail masking something terrible behind it. In St. Cloud, near a place called Calvary Hill, the clouds begin to rotate. It starts slowly, a lazy, counterclockwise spin, like water draining from a tub, but on a scale of miles. The clouds begin to lower. A wall cloud forms, hanging beneath the storm base like a pedestal, and from the center of that pedestal, a finger descends. It didn't look like a funnel at first. It looked like smoke, like a bonfire had gone out of control. It was wispy, dancing, touching the ground and then pulling back up, teasing us. This is the rope stage, the birth of the beast. But it doesn't stay a rope for long. The energy available in the atmosphere that day was off the charts. As soon as that funnel connects with the earth, the circuit is complete. The updraft sucks warm air into the vortex. The funnel widens. It darkens. It goes from a wisp of smoke to a column of charcoal, to a wide, screaming mouth of destruction. It touches down. The time is approximately 4 p.m. The location is southwest of St. Cloud. The monster has arrived, but it's not alone. This is what makes the 1886 outbreak so unique and so terrifying. It wasn't just one tornado. It was a family of them, a cluster. Observers reported seeing satellite tornadoes, smaller, erratic vortices spinning around the main funnel, like remora fish swimming alongside a shark. These satellite tornadoes can be even more intense than the main funnel, ripping through specific houses while leaving the neighbors untouched. It creates a chaotic, unpredictable path of death. As the tornado begins to chew up the earth near Calvary Hill, It hits a cemetery. It rips headstones from the ground. It disturbs the resting places of the dead, turning granite markers into missiles. Think about that. The first debris this tornado picks up, the first ammunition it gathers to fire at the city of St. Cloud, is the gravestones of its ancestors. It's a grim foreshadowing of what is to come. In the St. Cloud freight yard, the station master looks out the window. He sees the black wall approaching. He hears the sound. People always say it sounds like a freight train, but that's because that's the loudest thing they know. Survivors of this storm, this specific storm, didn't say it sounded like a train. It sounded like a million bees, a hum, a vibration that you felt in your teeth, and then, underneath that, a low, grinding roar, like the earth itself was being ground into powder. The station master grabs the telegraph key. He tries to send a warning, but the lines are dead. The storm is moving at 40, maybe 50 miles per hour. It is closing the distance to the city center in seconds. People are still in the streets. Children are walking home from school. Shopkeepers are locking their doors, thinking it's just a thunderstorm. They have no idea that the thing approaching them is an F4, possibly an F5 tornado. Wind speeds exceeding 250 miles per hour. To put that in perspective, a Category 5 hurricane has winds of 157 miles per hour. This is nearly double that. The pressure inside the funnel is so low, it's a vacuum. If you are inside a building when this hits, the pressure difference alone can cause the structure to explode outward. The tornado widens. It is now a quarter-mile wide, a black, churning, debris-filled grinder. It crests the hill, and there, laid out before it, is the city of St. Cloud, the freight house, the Manitoba depot, the saloons, the churches, the homes, everything that makes a life. The station master drops the telegraph key. He runs, but you can't outrun 50 miles per hour. The roar becomes deafening. The light is extinguished. It goes pitch black. And then, the first building explodes. The waiting is over. The heat is gone. The silence is gone. The erasure has begun. 4:05 p.m. The freight house in St. Cloud is a massive structure. Solid timber, iron bolts. It is built to withstand Minnesota winters. Built to hold tons of grain and steel. It is a monument to permanence. And in less than 3 seconds, it ceases to be a building. It becomes shrapnel. The tornado doesn't just push it over. The pressure drop is so instantaneous, so violent, that the air inside the freight house tries to escape all at once. The walls blow outward. The roof, an acre of heavy timber and slate, lifts straight up. It hangs there, for a heartbeat, suspended in the gray void, and then the grinder catches it. The sound is no longer a hum. It is a physical weight. It presses against your eardrums until they feel like they might burst. Inside the depot, chaos. Men are diving under heavy oak desks. They are scrambling into the cellar, but the wind is faster. It grabs a train car, a fully loaded freight car, weighing 40 tons. Physics tells us that, to lift 40 tons of dead weight, you need a force that is difficult to calculate. But the wind treats it like a toy. It lifts the train car off the tracks. It spins it. It throws it. 100 feet through the air. It crashes into the street, disintegrating on impact. Iron wheels, solid steel axles, are twisted into pretzels. This is the power of the F4. It transforms the familiar world into a blender. I saw a horse, a dray horse. It was still hitched to a wagon. The wind just picked it up. The horse, the wagon, the driver. They just went up into the blackness. I never saw them come down. I closed my eyes. I put my hands over my ears, but the sound was inside my head. The tornado is moving northeast. It is carving a path of absolute ruin through the heart of St. Cloud. It tears through the residential district. These aren't just houses losing shingles. These are homes being wiped from the foundation, the swept clean phenomenon. When investigators look at the aftermath later, they will find nothing. No furniture, no appliances, no lumber, just a bare, concrete slab. Where did the house go? It was atomized. It was chewed up by the debris ball and spit out over a 10-mile radius. Imagine you are sitting in your living room. You have a piano, a heavy, cast-iron upright piano. It's the heaviest thing you own. You think it's immovable. The tornado hits. The windows shatter first, not from the wind, but from the pressure difference. Glass becomes sand, it scours your skin. Then the roof goes, then the piano. That 600-pound instrument is sucked out of the room. It flies through the air, colliding with a tree, exploding into a cloud of wire and ivory keys. Days later, they will find a single piano key embedded 3 inches deep into a telephone pole, 2 miles away. That is the velocity we are talking about. But back in St. Cloud, the horror is just beginning. The tornado has finished with the depot. It is finished with the residential district. It is now heading for the river, and standing in its way is the Manitoba Railroad shops. This is a complex of heavy industry, brick walls 2 feet thick, steel girders, locomotives under repair. The tornado hits it at 4:15 p.m. The destruction of the Manitoba shops was total. It wasn't just damage, it was erasure. The wind caught the heavy iron roofs and peeled them back like the lid of a sardine can. Beams, massive iron beams, were twisted and thrown like spears. One of those beams, a solid iron rail, is driven into the ground so deep that only the tip is showing. It remains there, a jagged monument to the impossible power of wind. Men are trapped inside. The walls collapse on them. The roar is so loud they can't hear the buildings falling around them. They only feel the vibration in the floor, and then the weight of the bricks. 24 people die in St. Cloud in these first 10 minutes. 74 buildings are leveled. But the storm isn't done. It's hungry. It reaches the edge of the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River, the border, the barrier, the lifeline. For the people of Sauk Rapids, watching from the East Bank, this was supposed to be their shield. They stood on their porches, watching the destruction in St. Cloud with a mix of horror and relief. It's over there, they thought. It can't cross the water. They were witnessing a phenomenon that few human beings have ever seen and lived to describe. The tornado moves off the land. It moves over the water. Usually, a tornado will kick up a spray. It becomes a waterspout. It looks misty, white, almost ghostly. But this was no waterspout. This was a grinder. The water, it didn't splash. It rose up. It looked like the river was standing up to meet the sky, a solid column of brown mud and water, and underneath it, the bottom. I saw the bottom. Let's stop for a second. Let's process that. I saw the bottom. The Mississippi River, even in 1886, is not a creek. It is a massive volume of moving water, thousands of gallons per second. For the riverbed to be visible, even for a second, requires a displacement of water that borders on the biblical. The vortex, spinning at 200, maybe 300 miles per hour, creates a suction so intense that it acts like a giant shop vac. It doesn't just blow the water aside, it inhales it. Millions of gallons of water are sucked up into the funnel. The tornado changes color instantly. It goes from black to a wet, churning brown. Fish, massive catfish, rocks, river mud, ancient debris. All of it is pulled up into the sky. And for a brief moment, a swath of the riverbed is dry. It's a sight that defies logic. It's a sight that makes you question reality. And for the people of Sauk Rapids, it was the moment their hope died. Because once the tornado inhaled the river, it didn't weaken. It got angry. Water is heavy. A cubic meter of water weighs a ton. Now, this tornado is carrying thousands of tons of water and mud in its debris ball. It has become a sandblaster, a liquid shotgun. It crosses the river in less than a minute. It climbs the east bank, and it sets its sights directly, perfectly, on the heart of Sauk Rapids. St. Cloud was a glancing blow. The tornado hit the edge of the city. Sauk Rapids? Sauk Rapids is a direct hit, a bullseye. If St. Cloud was a tragedy, Sauk Rapids was an execution. The tornado widened as it crossed the river. It was now nearly half a mile wide, and it was centered exactly on Main Street. There was no escape. There was no safe side of town. The town was the path. 4:20 p.m., the Stanton Flour Mill. This is the economic heart of the city. 4 stories of brick and timber, filled with machinery and filled with flour dust. Flour dust is highly flammable, explosive even. When the tornado hits the mill, it's not just a collapse, it's a disintegration. The brick walls explode. The machinery, massive millstones, steel rollers are tossed into the air. And then, the flour. Tons of white flour are released into the wind. It mixes with the river water. It mixes with the mud. It creates a paste, a concrete-like slurry that coats everything. If you were caught outside, you weren't just battered by wind, you were plastered. Survivors were found later, caked in a hard shell of gray mud and dough, looking like statues. The destruction of the mill is the signal. The city is falling. The tornado moves down Main Street. It takes the hardware store. It takes the post office. It takes the bank. Safe deposit boxes, locked in steel vaults, are ripped open. Gold coins are scattered like confetti. Legal documents, deeds to the land, contracts, are sucked up into the vortex to join the checks from St. Cloud in the upper atmosphere. The economy of Sauk Rapids is literally being blown away. I was in the cellar of the hotel, the floor above us. It just vanished. The sky, the black sky, was suddenly the ceiling. I looked up and saw a cow flying. I saw a bed frame. And then, the noise stopped being a roar. It became a scream. A high-pitched, metal scream. That scream, that's the sound of nails being ripped out of wood. Millions of them, all at once. The pressure is doing strange things now. We have reports of chickens being found, alive, but completely plucked of their feathers. Every single feather, stripped by the suction, leaving the bird naked but unharmed. We have reports of straws, fragile pieces of dry straw, driven through telephone poles like nails. The physics of high-velocity wind turns soft objects into projectiles. A playing card can cut skin. A piece of wood can pierce a brick wall. In Sauk Rapids, the air itself is a weapon. Let's talk about the schoolhouse. Classes were out, thank God. But the building stood as a landmark. The tornado hits it. The top floor is sheared off. The bell, the massive bronze school bell, is torn from the belfry. It flies. It lands a block away, embedding itself in the earth. Imagine the kinetic energy required to throw a bronze bell a city block. It's the energy of a bomb. Sauk Rapids is being bombed, but the enemy isn't human. It's the atmosphere. But amidst the chaos, amidst the flying bricks and the exploding buildings, there are the people, the human cost of the erasure. In the wreckage of the Stanton Mill, workers are buried. They are trapped in the basement, water from the ruptured mill race pouring in. They are drowning in the dark, while the tornado screams above them. On the street, a mother is running with her child. She reaches for the door of a shop, desperate for shelter, but the wind grabs her. My mother, she let go of my hand. She didn't mean to. The wind took her. I saw her slide away. She was reaching for me, and then a wall fell, and I didn't see her anymore. I didn't see the street anymore. It was just dust. I couldn't breathe. I had mud in my mouth. This is the brutality of the event. It doesn't care about love. It doesn't care about fear. It is a machine. The tornado grinds through the entire length of the town. When it exits the north side of Sauk Rapids, there is no town left. Main Street is gone. The commercial district is gone. The homes are gone. Whatever plans the city council had for the future, whatever dreams the merchants had of rivaling Minneapolis, they are gone, scattered across the fields of Benton County. The city of Sauk Rapids didn't just suffer a disaster, it suffered an amputation. But the beast isn't full. It crosses out of the city limits. It moves into the countryside. It heads north, toward the village of Rice, toward the wedding. We mentioned the wedding earlier, Charles Lindbergh. A day of joy. By 4:35 p.m., the wedding party is in full swing. The ceremony is over. They are celebrating. They are inside the farmhouse. The music is playing. They don't have a telegraph. They don't have a view of the river. They don't know that St. Cloud is burning. They don't know that Sauk Rapids is erased. They only know that the sky is getting dark. One of the guests looked out the window. He said, "It looks like night is coming early." He didn't know he was looking at death. The tornado strikes the farmhouse at 4:40 p.m. There is no warning, no siren, just the sudden disintegration of the world. The house, a sturdy wooden structure, is lifted from its foundation, it is rotated in the air, and then it is smashed back down. The groom, the bride, the guests, they are all inside. It is a kaleidoscope of horror. The floor becomes the ceiling. The windows become shrapnel. 7 people in that house are killed instantly, including the groom. An hour ago, he was saying his vows. He was promising till death do us part. The storm held him to it. The bride is found later, alive, but critically injured. Her wedding dress, ripped to shreds, stained with mud and blood. This is the cruelty of the storm. It takes the highest moments of human joy and turns them into the deepest moments of despair. As the tornado moves past Rice, it begins to change shape again. It has consumed 2 cities. It has consumed a wedding. It has consumed the river. It is bloated with debris. It enters the rope-out phase. But don't let the name fool you. A roping tornado can be erratic and deadly. It whips back and forth like a snake. It strikes a few more farms. It kills a few more livestock. And then, finally, near the town of Buckman, it lifts. It pulls back up into the clouds. The monster is gone, but it leaves something behind. The black rain. Survivors who crawled out of their cellars, who pulled themselves from the rubble, reported a strange phenomenon. It started to rain, but it wasn't water. It was mud. The tornado had sucked up so much topsoil, so much river bottom, so much pulverized brick and mortar, that the cloud was saturated with filth. It rained black mud for 20 minutes. It coated the wounds of the dying. It stained the white shirts of the dead. It turned the ruins of Sauk Rapids into a gray, monochromatic hellscape, and mixed in with the mud were the artifacts. A farmer in Wisconsin, 50 miles away, walks out to his field. He sees something fluttering in the grass. He picks it up. It's a photograph, a tintype, a picture of a smiling family. He turns it over. There is no name. He looks up at the sky. The clouds are dark to the west. He wonders where it came from. He doesn't know that the family in the photo is gone. He doesn't know that the house they lived in is gone. He is holding a ghost. Back in Sauk Rapids, the silence returns. But it is not the heavy, humid silence of the morning. This is the silence of absence. The birds are dead. The dogs are dead. The machinery is silent. The only sound is the crying. It was quiet, terrifyingly quiet. You could hear a man coughing 3 blocks away because there were no walls to stop the sound. I stood up. I looked around. And I didn't know where I was. I had lived in Sauk Rapids my whole life, and I didn't recognize a single thing. It was just gone. Everything was gone. The sun begins to set on April 14th. The heat is gone. The cold front has taken over. The temperature drops. Survivors, wet, covered in mud, shivering in the ruins, prepare for the longest night of their lives. They are in shock. They are bleeding, and they are starting to realize that the world they woke up in this morning doesn't exist anymore. The map has changed. St. Cloud is wounded. But Sauk Rapids is dead. And in the darkness, under the ruins of the flour mill, the trapped workers are praying for help. But help is a long way off. The telegraph lines are down. The trains are destroyed. The bridges are damaged. They are alone. And the question hanging in the cold night air is no longer, will it hit? The question now is, how do we survive what comes next? The investigation into the aftermath, the medical triage, and the strange twist of fate that allowed St. Cloud to rise from the ashes while Sauk Rapids faded into history is a story of resilience, politics, and the cruel calculus of disaster. We will uncover the why in Act 3, but for now, stand in the silence and look at the empty space where a city used to be. Night falls over central Minnesota, but it is not a peaceful night. Imagine, if you can, the sensory deprivation of April 14th, 1886 at 8:00 p.m. There are no streetlights. The gas lines have been ruptured, so the gas lamps are dead. The electricity, what little there was in the industrial sectors, is gone. The moon is obscured by the backside of the storm system that just destroyed the world. It is pitch black. The only light comes from the flicker of kerosene lanterns bobbing through the rubble like fireflies in a graveyard. And the cold. We talked about the heat earlier, the oppressiveness of the afternoon. That is gone. The cold front that triggered the tornado has now settled in. The temperature is plummeting toward freezing. Survivors who have lost their clothes, whose skin has been scoured raw by the wind, are now shivering in the mud. The silence of the immediate aftermath has broken. Now, the air is filled with a new sound. It wasn't screaming anymore. The screaming had stopped. It was moaning, a low, constant drone of pain, coming from everywhere, from under the piles of brick, from the cellar holes. It sounded like the earth itself was in pain. The first responders to this disaster were not professionals. There was no FEMA. There was no National Guard on speed dial. There were no helicopters coming to lift the injured out. The first responders were the survivors. Men with broken arms lifting timber off their neighbors. Mothers digging through wet brick with their bare hands until their fingernails tore off. And, in St. Cloud, a group of women who would change the history of the region forever. The Sisters of St. Benedict. If you want to understand why St. Cloud is the city it is today, you have to look at this night. The convent was located just outside the worst of the damage. Mother Benedicta, the leader of the order, saw the storm pass. She saw the smoke. She saw the debris. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait for a doctor. She opened the doors. They didn't have a hospital. They had a school. They had a convent. But that night, they turned the classrooms into wards. They pushed the desks together to make operating tables. They tore up their own habits, their holy clothing, to make bandages. This is a critical moment, a divergence point. In Sauk Rapids, there was no convent. There was no organized medical force. The injured lay in the mud, or were dragged into the few standing barns. But in St. Cloud, the injured were being carried by the dozen to the sisters. The nuns worked for 48 hours straight. No sleep, no food. Just the endless, bloody work of triage. They were washing mud out of open wounds. They were setting bones that had been snapped like twigs. They were holding the hands of men who were dying of internal injuries that 1886 medicine couldn't even diagnose, let alone fix. Dr. A.C. Lamoth Ramsey, one of the few surgeons in the area, arrived at the convent. He walked into a scene that looked more like the Battle of Gettysburg than a schoolhouse. He performed amputations by candlelight. Ether was scarce. Whiskey was used. The screams from that schoolhouse echoed through the night. But amidst the horror, a seed was planted. The Sisters of St. Benedict proved that night that they were the backbone of the city's care. This makeshift triage center would eventually grow, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, into the St. Cloud Hospital. Today, it is the largest medical center in central Minnesota, a massive regional hub. That hospital exists because of this tornado, because on the worst night in history, the nuns didn't blink. But across the river, in the ruins of Sauk Rapids, the situation was far more dire. The bridge was damaged. Communication with St. Cloud was difficult. They were isolated. The darkness concealed the true extent of the horror. It wasn't until the sun rose on the morning of April 15th that the survivors could actually see what had happened to them. The sun came up, and it was a beautiful morning. The sky was blue. The birds that survived were singing. It felt cruel. I looked down Main Street, and I didn't know where I was. The landmarks were gone. The bank, the hotel, the mill. It was just flat. It looked like a giant scythe had cut the town down like wheat. The morning brought the Sightseers. Human nature is a strange thing. Within hours of the news spreading, trains began arriving from Minneapolis and St. Paul, not just with aid, but with tourists. People wanted to see the monster's footprints. They walked through the debris fields. Some helped, some stared, and some, unfortunately, took souvenirs. They found people pocketing coins from the shattered bank vault. They found people picking up silverware from destroyed homes. It got so bad that the mayor of St. Cloud had to deputize a special police force just to guard the ruins. Imagine that. You've lost your home, your family, And you have to stand guard over a pile of bricks, so a stranger from the Twin Cities doesn't steal your memories. But the investigation that started that morning wasn't just about protecting property. It was about identifying the dead. This is the grim reality of an F4, F5 tornado. The trauma to the human body is extreme. Many victims were unrecognizable. They were covered in the black mud we talked about. They were battered by debris. Families wandered from makeshift morgue to makeshift morgue, lifting sheets, hoping not to recognize the face underneath. There were heartbreaking scenes. A father recognizing his daughter only by the ring on her finger. A mother recognizing her son by the shoes she had bought him just that week. And then, there were the missing. In the chaos of the river crossing, some people were simply blown away. There were reports of bodies found miles downstream. The river, which had been sucked dry for a moment, became a tomb for those it washed away when the water returned. And this brings us back to the debris tracker, because as the days went on, the true power of the storm began to reveal itself through the objects that fell from the sky. Let's look at the map of the debris field. We found a check in Wisconsin. That's 60 miles away. But that's just paper. Paper is light. What's more terrifying is the heavy debris. A piece of galvanized steel roofing, 8 feet long, crumpled like a tissue, was found 18 miles north of Sauk Rapids. Clothing from the wedding party in Rice was found in the trees near Piers, 25 miles away. This black rain of debris solves a mystery for meteorologists. It tells us about the structure of the storm. For debris to travel 60 miles, it had to be lifted into the jet stream. It means the updraft of the St. Cloud tornado didn't just stop at the cloud base. It punched through. It reached altitudes of 30, maybe 40,000 feet. It was an atmospheric vacuum cleaner that connected the ground directly to the stratosphere. And then there is the mystery of the double impact. For years, there was a debate. Was it one tornado or two? The witnesses in St. Cloud saw one massive funnel. The witnesses in Sauk Rapids saw a wider, darker cloud. Modern meteorological analysis suggests this was a cyclic supercell. The storm would drop a tornado, destroy a town, lift, cycle its energy, and drop a new, stronger tornado. This explains the skipping nature of the damage. It explains why some farms between the cities were spared, while the cities themselves were annihilated. It wasn't mercy. It was just the breathing rhythm of the beast. But let's go back to the human element, specifically, the wedding party. The tragedy in Rice became national news. It was the story that broke hearts across America. The groom, Charles, was buried in his wedding suit. The bride survived, but her life was effectively over. In the 1880s, a woman's security was often tied to her marriage. She was left a widow before she was truly a wife. She was injured. Her home was gone. Her family was decimated. We have records indicating she never remarried. She lived the rest of her life as a living ghost of the storm. She never liked the wind after that, even a summer breeze. If the leaves started to rustle, she would go into the cellar. She spent half her life in the dark, waiting for a monster that never came back. And what about the cities? This is the core of our story, the tale of two cities. Before April 14th, Sauk Rapids was the favorite. It had the better location for water power. It had the granite quarries. It had the capital. St. Cloud was the runner-up. But the tornado changed the economic calculus of the entire region in 15 minutes. Here is the brutal truth of disaster economics. Recovery requires momentum. St. Cloud was hit hard. Yes, the freight house was gone. The shops were damaged. 20 people died. But the core of the city, the business district, was largely intact. The hospital was operating. The banks were open. They could rebuild. Sauk Rapids was erased. The Stanton flour mill, the engine of the town's economy, was a pile of bricks. The owner looked at the wreckage, looked at the cost of rebuilding, and looked at the insurance that didn't exist. He didn't rebuild. He moved. The businesses that had been there, the blacksmiths, the hotels, the dry goods stores, they didn't have a building to operate out of. Their inventory was in Wisconsin. Their customers were dead or fleeing. They left. Capital is a coward, money doesn't like risk, and after the tornado, Sauk Rapids looked like a risk. St. Cloud looked like a survivor. So the investment money, the railroad money, the manufacturing money, it all flowed west across the river. St. Cloud absorbed the refugees from Sauk Rapids. It absorbed the business. It took Sauk Rapids nearly a century to recover its population. Think about that. 100 years of stagnation. While St. Cloud grew into a university town, a medical hub, a retail giant, Sauk Rapids remained a small, quiet, bedroom community. It lost its destiny. If you drive through Sauk Rapids today, you can see the ghosts. There are empty lots where grand buildings once stood. The street layout is different. The downtown is modest compared to the sprawling metropolis across the river. The tornado didn't just kill people. It killed a timeline. It killed the what if. There is a concept in chaos theory called the butterfly effect. A butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil and causes a tornado in Texas. In this case, a tornado in Minnesota flapped its wings and shifted the economic center of gravity for the entire state. If that storm had tracked 1 mile to the north, Sauk Rapids might be the Rochester or the Duluth of today. St. Cloud might be the suburb. We are living in the world the wind carved. As we close this investigation, we need to visit the monuments, the physical scars that remain today. If you go to St. Cloud, walk down to the river. There is a park. It's beautiful, green grass, calm water. But if you look closely, you can find them. The tornado trees, old oaks, ancient oaks that are twisted. Their trunks are gnarled and bent in unnatural shapes. They were saplings in 1886. The wind twisted them, but didn't break them. They grew around the trauma. They are living witnesses. And then, there is the artifact we mentioned at the beginning, the twisted iron beam. It sits in a museum now, a piece of the Manitoba depot. It is solid iron, an I-beam. It is tied in a knot, not bent, knotted. Metallurgists have looked at it. To do that to cold iron requires heat and force that is difficult to replicate in a factory. The wind did it in seconds. It sits there, silent, cold, and terrifying. A reminder that our buildings, our steel, our permanence is an illusion. We often think of history as a list of dates and wars, presidents and treaties. But sometimes, history is just physics. It's a pressure differential. It's a dew point. It's a sheer wind. The people of St. Cloud and Sauk Rapids went to sleep on April 13th thinking their future was in their own hands. They thought hard work and smart investments would decide who won the rivalry. They were wrong. The winner was decided by a random roll of the atmospheric dice. 72 people died that day. Hundreds were injured. A city was erased. But from the mud, something else grew. A hospital that saves thousands of lives a year. A community that learned that their only true protection wasn't the river, or the bank, or the brick walls. It was each other. When the telegraph lines were down, when the bridges were out, when the sky turned black, the only thing that mattered was the hand reaching out of the dark. The 1886 tornado is more than just a weather event. It is the origin story of the modern Midwest. It is a story of how fragile our plans are, and how, even when the map is erased, we pick up the pen and we draw it again. This has been the story of the St. Cloud Sauk Rapids tornado. And the next time you look at a weather map and you see that red warning box, remember the flour mill, remember the river sucked dry, and respect the wind.